What is going on, Chess YouTube? So in today's video, we are looking at round number 1 of the 2024 World Championship match between Ding Liren of China, the defending champion, and Gukesh D, the man of the hour, the challenger of India. And here we go. In the game, Gukesh is playing as white. He opens 1e4, the most aggressive move on move 1, and of course, best by test. Now, Ding Liren, he is mainly a 1e5 player. He does love the martial attack as black if white goes for the Roy Lopez. However, in this game, he does not go e5. Instead, he plays a very rare opening at the highest level. That is the move 1e6, the French defense. The idea being black wants to go d5, counterattacking in the center. However, this line is thought to give white a very pleasant edge, and for that reason, it really isn't seen at the highest level that often, especially not in World Championship matches. However, this is what Ding Liren went for in the game. So now, d4 and then d5, and here in knight to c3 for Gukesh. Gukesh did blitz out this move. He was not phased at all, and that shows he was ready for the French defense from Ding Liren. All right, Ding, on move 3, which line does he want to go for? The main lines here for black are d takes e4, knight f6, and of course bishop b4, the notorious Winawer variation. Now, in this game, black does go knight to f6. That is arguably the most solid move. That is the top engine line these days. Now here, Gukesh, he does gain space in the center, e5, knocking back the knight on f6, and now we do have that famous French defense pawn structure in the center with white's pawns on e5 and d4 and black's pawns on d5 and e6. Now, of course, the knight has to go somewhere. The main line is knight fd7, and that is what Ding goes for. So, knight fd7, then f4 for white, gaining space on the king side, and now, of course, the very typical French defense move, c5, counterattacking on the queen side and putting pressure on white's pawn on d4. Of course, that d4 pawn is going to be black's main source of counterplay in this opening. Black's going to attack it with everything he's got. For example, knight c6, maybe even queen b6 could be coming in the future. Now here, the main line for white, as far as I know, is just the move knight to f3. The idea being you want to go knight to f3, then bishop b3, queen d2, and then you can decide, do you want to castle on the king side or on the queen side with long castles? Both options do work. Both sides are very playable for the king. Now, here, instead of knight to f3, he played a move that absolutely surprised me. That is the move knight c to e2. And this move is very playable. It's just not as strong and not seen as often as knight to f3. Now, the benefit of this move is that black does not take on d4 right away. Then you can go c3, bolstering that pawn on d4. And if black ever takes, again, you recapture with the c pawn, and you do maintain a good pawn on the d4 square. And that is what happens. So, Ding Liren, knight c6, putting more pressure on d4, threatening c takes d4, and now Gukesh, c3, bolstering that pawn on d4, and now, of course, he will have that pawn on d4 for a very, very long time. All right, now, Ding Liren, he's played all of the obvious moves in this position. His knights are on good squares on d7 and c6, and now, how does he want to proceed? His two main options, number 1, are to go, say, bishop e7 and castle right away. The other option is to develop the queen side and go for very fast queenside counterplay. For example, I don't know, queen b6, queen a5, a5, and so on are all playable. Now, in the game, Ding Liren, he played a very interesting move, a5, gaining space on the queen side, and this move is very typical for high-level grandmaster chess these days. When in doubt, you just push those rook pawns down the board, you know, a5, h5, and so on, gaining space. Now, the idea behind this move, Ding Liren, he may be threatening the move a4, gaining even more space on the queen side, and then he can follow up, say, queen to a5 with the queen behind the pawn, and that pawn on a4 will be a very significant asset throughout this game, giving him more space and giving him just overall a good advantage on the queen side. Now here, a4 is going to be the best move for white, locking down that pawn forever. Of course, the drawback of going a4 is that black takes on d4. Let's say c takes, then the b4 square could be a weakness later in the game. However, overall, it is a benefit to go a4, clamping down on that a pawn, stopping the a4 advance from black. Now, instead of that here, Gukesh, he did go knight to f3, developing the knight on the king side, and this does give Ding Liren the chance to go a4 himself, and he does it in a heartbeat. The move is a4, gaining space on the queen side, and now again, the rook and the queen have access to the a5 square. That could be a very big deal as the game progresses. All right, now, Gukesh, he's got to decide how does he want to proceed. I mean, does he want to go, say, for a fast kingside castling or something else? Now, here in the game, he does go bishop e3. a very solid move. E3 is the standard square for the bishop in this line of the French defense, the classical variation as far as I know. And now here, Ding Liren. The move is bishop e7, a very solid move, setting up short castles, maybe setting up f6 and knight takes f6 and so on in the future. And again, staying very, very flexible. All right, now, Gukesh. In this position, he has to decide on a plan. Now, the drawback of this setup with knight c to e2 that he played earlier in the game, of course, that does lock in that bishop on f1. You can't go, say, bishop d3 and short castles. And of course, with the pawn on a4, castling on the queen side is going to be very, very risky. Black's attack is just too active there. So with that in mind here, White's got to find the right way to castle or get some counterplay going on the king side. Now, there are many different ideas here. The top engine line is d takes c5, curious enough. The idea being d takes and then perhaps knight e to d4, jumping in with the knight to the very solid d4 square. Beyond that, there are many other playable ideas. Queen c2, knight g3, even h4, the alpha 0 move is playable. But instead of those in the game, Gukesh, he does go g4, gaining space with the g-pawn. And this is a very, very double-edged move. Now, the idea is you are supporting a future f5 advance. Of course, if e takes f5, then you can recapture with a g-pawn. That is sort of the whole idea of this. However, the drawback here, it does significantly weaken the dark squares around the king side. For example, bishop h4 could now be a very serious threat. The idea being knight takes, then queen takes, and White would have to defend. Now, that is not the biggest threat yet. However, as the game progresses, that could be a very strong idea for Ding Liren, and White will have to watch out for that. And beyond that, castling on the king side in general is going to be a lot riskier, as again, with that pawn on g4 instead of g2, the king side just has so much empty space here in front of the king, or in front of the king where it would be on the g1 square. All right, here, it is Ding Liren's turn to move, and instead of going short castles, that is what I expected. He actually continues his queenside counterplay with the move queen to a5. Now, of course, that pawn on c3 is pinned to the king on e1. Therefore, if black goes c takes d4, you can't recapture with the pawn, as again, the pawn is pinned. So, a very tricky idea by Ding Liren, and overall, the queen is very, very active on the queen side. All right, now, what's it going to be for Gukesh? Well, in the game, he does go bishop g2, a solid move, setting up short castles, and this was one of the other ideas of g4, giving the bishop the g2 square to go to. All right, now, Ding Liren, here, his best idea, perhaps once again, is going to be short castles, but again, he ignores that and continues his play on the queen side. a3 is the move, the alpha 0 a pawn reaching its final destination, at least for now, and the idea being, Ding Liren is trying to soften up the queen side. If you go, say, b3, then the pawn on c3 will be a lot weaker, and that is the main idea here. And sure enough, Gukesh, he finds the right idea. That is going to be b3, just defending that pawn. You don't want to go b takes a3, weakening your pawn structure on the queen side. Then your queen side pawn structure would be absolutely shattered. You don't want that. So, b3 overall, the best idea. And now Ding Liren does take on d4. C takes d4, again showing the idea of queen to a5. C takes d4 back is now possible as that pawn on c3 is pinned to the king on the e1 square. All right, with that in mind here, Gukesh, he finds the best response. That is the move b4, a very good intermediate move. And this move is very thematic for many different lines of the French defense. Now, very importantly, black has the option, maybe, of knight takes b4, the idea being c takes, then bishop takes. But it turns out after bishop d2, White is doing just fine. He doesn't lose a piece. He remains up material, so with that in mind, that is not the right move. Instead, queen to c7 is the move for Ding Liren. Just retreating the knight, playing very solid. And here, Gukesh, he just takes on d4 with the e knight. Knight e takes d4. And here, the dust has sort of settled, and Gukesh has navigated the complications very, very well. And on move 14, he does have a very pleasant advantage in the French defense, as you can see by the eval bar on the left. This is sort of what you would expect in a French defense played correctly by two high-level players. White being a little bit better, but black overall being very, very solid, and he's still very much in the game. All right, now, Ding Liren, knight to b6 is the move, a very strong move, threatening knight to c4, and c4 will be a terrific square for the knight, and of course, that c4 square is now a permanent weakness, as the move b4 did give up control of c4, so Ding Liren demonstrating why he is a world champion here. All right, Gukesh, short castles is the move, getting his king to safety. Of course, there were other ideas like potentially knight b5, harassing the queen, but overall, short castles, likely the best response, and definitely the safest. Now, Ding Liren, he continues with his queenside play. Knight to c4, jumping in with the knight. And now, of course, knight takes e3 is a very real threat. And you don't want to defend that bishop with the queen. Say, queen e2 would not be a good move, as that dark square bishop is just so important to the white attack here. He must keep that bishop alive. Therefore, bishop f2 is the move, retreating the bishop. However, overall, f2 is a very passive square for the bishop. I mean, typically you do want it on this diagonal here, where it can assist with the attack on the king side. And beyond that, that bishop does block in that rook on f1. Ideas like f5 are going to be a lot harder to achieve later in the game. All right, now Ding Liren, it is his turn to move. It is move 16, and here he just goes bishop d7, developing his queenside, and again, continuing to delay the development of his king. He technically has the option of castling on the king side or the queen side, or just keeping it in the center for a while. We'll have to wait and see what he has in mind. All right, Gukesh, his main plan here is going to be attacking on the king side, potentially with f5 in the future. Therefore, a good starting plan is to bolster that pawn on e5. Of course, if you go f5 right away, e5 will hang to either knight. Therefore, ideas like queen e2 or rook to e1 do come to mind. And here, Gukesh does go queen to e2, bolstering that pawn on e5 with the queen. Maybe he wants to follow up rook a to e1 and then go f5. That could be one idea. Now here, Ding Liren, he trades knights. Knight takes d4, and then knight takes d4, taking back with the knight. Of course, bishop takes may have been a little bit more precise, as the bishop would be very well placed on d4, bolstering that e5 pawn and setting up f5, but knight takes d4, also not a bad move at all. But here, Ding Liren, he finds maybe the flaw with this move. Of course, with the bishop on d4, that bishop would also defend c3, that being a very vulnerable pawn in white's camp. And now Ding Liren, he jumps in with the knight further into enemy territory, knight to b2. Again, jumping in, the point being queen takes c3 is a very real threat, as then queen takes, if say rook c1, then the pawn on b4 would fall as well. Queen takes b4 would be the move. And here, even if white defends, black is going to have the option of knight to a4, again attacking that pawn on c3 with both the knight and the queen. I mean, again, if that pawn on c3 does fall, the entire queen side will collapse instantly. So here, Gukesh, he must defend. How's he going to defend? Well, there are two main ways to do it. One is with the queen, and the other is with the bishop. So, for example, queen e3, queen f3, and bishop e1 are all the top engine lines. In the game, Gukesh does go queen to e3, defending with the queen. Very solid, nothing wrong with that. But Ding Liren, he continues to pile on the pressure. Rook to c8, the rook and the queen now piling down on that pawn. It needs more defense. What are you going to do here? Well, it turns out bishop e1, believe it or not, the undeveloping move is the best idea. Of course, you do defend with the bishop. That means queen takes c3 will never, ever be a possibility. And beyond that, with the bishop on e1, you are opening up the f-file for the rook. That means f5 would be a much more dangerous threat. So overall, bishop e1 and Gukesh would be sitting pretty. But instead, rook a to c1. And now, at first glance, this move looks very logical. Of course, the rook does defend on c3. Therefore, queen takes c3 is basically never a possibility. However, here, Ding Liren, he spots the problem with this move instantly. And if you like puzzles, go ahead and pause the video and try to find the beautiful idea by Ding Liren here in this position. And while you're at it, if you're enjoying this video and want to see all of the World Championship matches, go ahead and smash that YouTube like button to get more videos just like this. Thank you so much for doing that. All right, here, Ding Liren, of course, he flies in with the queen, queen to c4, threatening the pawn on a2, capitalizing on the space left behind by the move rook to c1. Now here, if that pawn falls, the alpha 0 a pawn on the a3 square is going to be threatening to go a2, then a1, and that pawn will just be, the most important pawn in the position. That'll be devastating. So Gukesh, he has to find some way to defend, right? Well, turns out you really can't defend the pawn. If you go rook to a1, defending with the rook, then of course the pawn on c3 falls, and then very soon after the pawn on b4 will fall as well. So here, Gukesh, he's basically all in. He must attack on the king side. His queen side is going to collapse, and the rest of this game is going to get very, very heated. All right, Gukesh, how does he want to continue the attack? Well, there are many ways to do it. For example, improving the placement of your bishop, say bishop f3 or g3 is playable, rook e1 is playable, but instead in the game, Gukesh plays the most aggressive move on the board. That is the move f5, threatening to open up the f-file. And again, remember, Ding Liren, his king still has not castled. If it does not castle soon and the f-file opens up, the king could be stuck in the center forever, as the rook may be controlling the open f-file in the near future. All right, Ding Liren, short castling is one option, but instead he finds an even stronger move. That is just the move queen to d3, jumping in with the queen, offering the queen trade. And now, of course, if the queens come flying off the board, then Ding Liren is going to have a massive advantage, as again, the queenside pawns are so weak, and it's so hard to attack on the king side without the queens on the board. So Gukesh, he's got to keep the queens alive. And now here, it's very important to find the best square for the queen, and it turns out there is only one good move in this position for Gukesh, and he doesn't find it. In the game, Gukesh did go queen to e1, retreating the queen, but it turns out this move has one big drawback. It gives up control of the g5 square, allowing bishop g5. For that reason, instead of queen to e1, the right move is queen to f4. The queen's very active on f4. It defends e5, defends f5. It's on the f file, and very importantly, it guards that g5 square, stopping bishop g5 ideas. Now instead, queen to e1 was played, and now Ding Liren, he immediately capitalizes with the move bishop g5. And commentators like Anish Giri said this was the main thing that Gukesh missed. He must have missed this bishop g5 move, because after this, Ding Liren is just in total control of this game, as you can see by the eval bar on the left, just skyrocketing down in favor of Ding Liren with the black pieces. All right, of course, Gukesh, he could be the next world champion. He is down, but he's not out. How does he want to defend? Of course, the rook on c1 is under attack. It must move. And where are you going to go? Well, it turns out rook to a1 is not a good idea. Besides being incredibly passive, then bishop d2, flying in with the bishop, would be a very serious threat. So with that in mind here, rook to c2 is the move. And curiously enough, the rook is defended by the knight on d4. That knight's not going anywhere. Therefore, that rook is very safe on c2 for a very, very long time. All right, now, Ding Liren, rook c4, flying in with the rook. The threat being potentially rook takes c4, removing the defender of the rook, and then queen takes c2. So, of course, Gukesh is going to have to defend, right? Well, turns out he counterattacks. h4, the alpha 0 h pawn has entered the game. My favorite move on the chessboard. Here we go, pressuring the bishop while leaving the rook undefended via this tactic. All right, in the game, Ding Liren, he must retreat that bishop. There is no time for rook takes d4 ideas. For example, rook takes, c takes, queen takes, and then you lose the bishop. You do lose material. Therefore, the bishop must retreat first. So, in the game, bishop f4 is the move. A very active square for the bishop, but very double-edged. Of course, the bishop could be attacked later if this bishop moves and the rook has the attack on the bishop. However, overall, this was the stronger move, assuming Ding Liren falls up correctly, this being stronger than, say, bishop e7 or bishop d8. Now, here, in this position, Gukesh, what's it going to be? Well, he finds the move queen to b1, defending the rook on the c2 square with the queen. That way, if rook takes, then bishop takes, then the rook is still defended. And overall, despite being a relatively passive square for the queen, again, white is still hanging on by the thin of his hair. All right, here, Ding Liren, he does finally capture that pawn on c3. Rook takes c3, then we have rook takes and queen takes. So the queen side is being obliterated. Gukesh is down one pawn, that being the pawn on the d file. And of course, that pawn on b4 is incredibly weak. And if that pawn falls, this could go downhill very fast. So Gukesh, he's got to find a way to counterattack, and he's got to do it right now. Now, first of all, you may be noticing the knight could theoretically drop back to e2, hitting both the queen and the bishop. But then after queen takes e5, winning a pawn and defending the bishop, black would be just fine. So knight e2 is playable, but maybe not the best idea here for Gukesh. Instead, he does take on e6, f takes e6, a very good practical decision, opening up threats on the f file. Now here, Ding Liren, he's got to find the right recapture. Do you want to take back with the pawn or the bishop? Again, this is a good time for a puzzle. If you like puzzles, pause the video and try to find the best recapture here for Ding Liren. It is very important for this game. All right, in this position, it turns out bishop takes e6 is actually the right idea. The point being the bishop will be active on e6. It does pressure g4, and that could be very useful in the future. Now, instead, Ding Liren did capture with the f pawn. F takes e6. And what is the drawback of this? First of all, it does open up the f file for white. That could be very important later in the game. And beyond that, the bishop on d7 is a little bit passive. Now, the benefit is the pawn on d5 is better bolstered by the pawn on e6 versus the bishop. That means ideas like, bishop takes d5 won't be a possibility later in the game. But overall, this was a little bit imprecise by Ding Liren. And here Gukesh, he starts to fight back. Knight to e2, jumping back with the knight, again forking the queen and the bishop. We talked about this idea a little bit earlier, and now, of course, Ding Liren will have the option of taking on b4 or e5. Turns out queen takes e5 is a little bit better, as the queen is a little better centralized, and winning that central pawn is more important than winning the queenside pawn. So queen takes e5. Now we have knight takes and queen takes, And of course, that was the idea of knight to e2 in the first place, winning that dark squared bishop, but giving up that pawn on e5 in the process. However, very importantly here, Gukesh, he's going to have very good attacking chances against the black king. For example, bishop c5 could be a threat in the future, guarding this square with the bishop and the rook and putting pressure on the queen. So there's going to be a lot of really cool tactics here. All right, in this position, Gukesh, his best move is actually the immediate bishop c5. However, instead of that, he does go queen to c2. Now, the point of this move, potentially, he may want to go queen to c7 if queen takes g4, and the queen would be very active on c7, pressuring the bishop and stopping short castles on the king side. However, here, Ding Liren, he spots the flaw with this move immediately. He does not take on g4. Queen takes g4, does run into bishop c5. That'd be very, very active for white. Instead, the move is queen to c4, blocking the c file with the queen, offering the queen trade. And as we know, if the queens come off the board, Ding Liren is up 2 pawns here. So queen takes, then knight takes would literally be suicide. He'd be losing in the endgame. So with that in mind, that is simply not an option. So instead, queen to d2 is the move, sliding the queen over. And here, Ding Liren, he just castled his king on the king side. Short castles is the move, and now Ding Liren on move 31, he has finally castled his king. His king is now safe. I mean, he is just playing like a monster in this game. All right, Gukesh, he is down but not out. What's it going to be from here? Well, he finds the strongest move instantly. Bishop d4, a very, very strong move. Here's the idea. If you move the black queen, say, I don't know, queen takes a2, picking up that free pawn, that would be a massive mistake. Then queen to g5, threatens checkmate on g7, and it turns out it's almost impossible to defend. For example, rook f7 runs into rook takes, king takes, then queen g7 again. So queen g5 is going to be a very serious threat if the black queen moves and it no longer guards d4, putting pressure on the bishop. So with that in mind here, Ding Liren, he does not take that free pawn on a2. It is not free. There is a very steep price to pay for taking that pawn. Instead, knight to d3 is the move, centralizing the knight and reducing the defense of the bishop by the queen. So now queen takes d4 is a real threat, as again, the queen is not defending it. Excellent stuff. But Gukesh here, queen to e3, the best move, sliding the queen over and defending. Now, very importantly, this was the best idea. There simply wasn't anything else. Ideas like bishop takes g7 just don't work out tactically, and rook takes f8 immediately looks attractive, but it turns out queen to e3 without taking on f8 is the better move. Now, Ding Liren, he's got a big choice. One of his main ideas here is to go e5 sooner or later, activating his bishop and his central pawn majority and putting pressure on that pawn on g5 or g4. But do you want to do it right away? Well, it turns out going e5 right away is a good move, but instead Ding Liren, he trades on f1 first. So rook takes f1 is the move for Ding, trading the pair of rooks. And now you got to figure out, do you want to recapture the bishop or the king? Well, it turns out bishop takes is the only good move. If you take with the king, that puts your king into this line of attack with the queen. For example, knight takes b4, winning a pawn with the check on the king would be devastating. So with that in mind, bishop f1 is the move. Instead, putting a pin on the knight to the queen on c4, Ding Liren's going to have to navigate this perfectly. And he starts with the very strong move e5, gaining space in the center. Finally, on move 34, the French defense pawn does move 1 square forward to e5 instead of e6, activating this bishop, activating his central pawn majority, and now Gukesh is going to be in for the fight of his life to hang on. Of course, that pawn on e5 is hanging. Gukesh does take it. Bishop takes e5, but now the queen slides over for Ding Liren. Queen takes g4, picking up that free pawn, hitting the king with check, and now Gukesh, how does he want to defend? Well, it turns out it is really, really hard to find a good defensive move. For example, if you move your king to, say, h2 or h1, then queen takes h4, wins that pawn immediately. You can go bishop g3, defending the pawn with the bishop, but that bishop would be pinned to the king, and it would be very vulnerable. Now, instead, in the game, Gukesh plays an equally good move, bishop g2, bishop g3, and g2 being equally good here. And now, of course, the bishop is defending and putting pressure on that pawn on d5, but for right now, it is pinned. Therefore, bishop takes d5 is not a possibility, as then you would lose the king on g1, and that wouldn't be a legal move at all. Now, here, Ding Liren, he flies in with the bishop. Bishop to f5. Ding Liren is now officially the one attacking white. We all thought the entire game Gukesh would be attacking on the king side, but the tables have turned. Ding Liren's attacking, and here in this position, Gukesh has about 1 minute left on the clock, maybe less, to make literally all of his moves until move 40. He is in extreme time pressure. Let's see if he can make it. All right, bishop g3, sliding back the bishop, defending h4, the only good move, but now Ding Liren, bishop e4, and look at this bishop. The bishop, the light square bishop, is typically the worst piece in the French defense for black. It's typically hemmed in by those pawns on e6 and d5 when it's on c8, but now the bishop on the e4 square, it is perfectly placed, supported by the pawn on d5, supporting the knight on the d3 square. Nothing can be taken, and of course, if you take on d5, then d takes would be a perfectly fine response, or even queen takes. Now here, Gukesh, king to h2, making his moves rapidly in time pressure, and Ding Liren just goes h6, a very good waiting move, giving his king the potential square h7 in the future if it needs it, getting rid of back rank mating ideas. Now, Gukesh, bishop h3, hits the queen, queen d1, and now Gukesh is down to seconds left on the clock. With 1 second left, he plays the move bishop d6, and with this move, he gets about 30 more minutes on the clock. He's no longer in time pressure, but of course, his position is just collapsing. Now, Ding Liren, queen c2, hits the king. The king's got to move. There's no good way to defend. For example, bishop g2 would be met by queen takes g2 checkmate. That is not an option. So the king does move forward. King g3, but now the pawn on the a2 square falls. Queen takes a2, and now the alpha 0 a pawn on a3 that marched all the way down from a5 to a4 to a3 earlier in the game. It is now the most important pawn in this position. If Gukesh does nothing, then that pawn will push down and promote. He's going to be in a lot of trouble. So with that in mind, bishop e6 is the move, hitting the king. The king must move. King to h8, Ding Liren staying off this vulnerable diagonal potentially, and here in this position, Gukesh, he is simply out of tricks. There's nothing he can do. Black has threats like queen to g2, that would be checkmate, and with that in mind here, in this position, Gukesh resigns on the spot to Ding Liren. Holy moly, what a game by both players, but especially Ding Liren. And Ding Liren is officially back, winning as black in the first game of the World Championship match against the man on fire, Gukesh. This is going to be an incredible World Championship match. I mean, no one expected this at all. Ding Liren winning as black in game number 1. I mean, this is going to be, you know, one for the ages. This whole tournament is going to be, not the whole tournament, the whole match is going to be just wild, and I can't wait to cover the rest of the games with you guys. So if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and smash that like button, and go ahead and check out this video right here, where I cover another one of Ding Liren and Gukesh D's greatest games ever. In my opinion, this showed the true potential of Gukesh at a very young age, when Ding Liren was at the top of the world, and Gukesh was only rated in 2500s, but despite the rating difference, Gukesh gave Ding Liren a fight for his life way back then. So if you enjoyed this game, check that video out, and I'll see you in the next video.